what are the implications of the studies on consciousness and attention? So the summary of the dual task experiment are the following. So there are cases or stimulus discrimination which requires attention or not. And the face gender discrimination is a kind of a case where top-down attentional amplification is not required. And discs and also letters are the kind of the things that top-down attentional amplification is necessary. And then other types of the stimuli that was studied with dual task includes some of the simplest kind of discrimination, such as color, hue, or orientation, and also surprisingly, in a sense, conjunction of the color and orientation. Whereas when the familiar stimulus, familiar letters are upright, it turns out that we can discriminate it without attention. And also when the stimulus is a natural scene like this, with or without attention, detection of the animals or cars and so on, this kind of natural stimulus category also doesn't require top-down attention. On the other hand, these artificial stimuli, such as here, and especially when it's rotated and becomes unfamiliar, they require attention. And also this rotation of the two balls, direction of the two balls or stimulus lighted from the top or bottom also requires attention. One possible kind of hypothesis about what changes at top and the bottom is that let's say biological relevance, and the top one is potentially the ones that are strongly wired in the brain, and also these elementary stimulus also may be already wired up in terms of brain connectivity, so that we don't need to require additional wiring, transiently activated by attention. And all other situation may be the case where some kind of rewiring or transient neural activation is necessary to do this unnatural binding or combination. That's one possibility. Okay, so there is lots of questions related to this summary of the studies. First of all, as I noted, the dual task has been consuming a lot of time to train the people. So we don't know many situations where the dual task is possible or not. So by expanding this kind of experiment into many different types, can we push the boundary of what is possible or not under the dual task? This is an empirical question. And the other stimuli and the tasks. And also, if we can do the online task version of the dual task, that will be much faster to address these questions. And also manipulating the effects of expectation, memory, and attention separately and independently. Can we find what is actually really critical kind of components for the determinants of the consciousness? That's also necessary to understand. And then what are the neural mechanisms underlying these distinct psychological components? We are also doing this task studies to separate expectation from attention, and it seems there is a different kind of effects in the brain response. And then all of this will contribute to the question of this, can simple-minded activation, more activation leads to consciousness? Really explain many of these findings. So in a sense, many people, including some of you possibly, believe that stronger brain activation is the conscious experience, right? So here, that in the beginning seems to make sense a lot. In the case of the blind side experiment, for example, when the stimulus is very strong, some of the blind side patients can see that stimulus. And in fact, if the attention is the one that actually changes activation pattern, paying attention to it, change blindness and inattention blindness, response becomes bigger and that goes beyond this, threshold much easier. And in the case of the unattended stimulus, like a dual task, maybe faces are much more efficient to go above the threshold. So that's why we are seeing the faces, but not the disks, because in the case of the disks, it requires it's usually like this, but by paying attention, somehow it goes up. On the other hand, initial result of the blind side and also CFS experiment, where unattended stimulus and the attended stimulus remains still like below visibility, but still attention can enhance the activation, like from this level to this level, right? So overall, it seems to make sense. But does it actually explain many of the findings that I described over the last couple of slides? And we need to stop here and then think about, can this kind of model explain why we experience visual qualia from visual cortex? Okay, well, what I mean is that in the end, what we want to understand is that the reason why we are seeing the stimulus in the way that we see, and that is sometimes called the problem of the qualia. And somehow, visual qualia arising from visual cortex feels really different compared to the auditory qualia that is arising from auditory cortex. But this kind of activation equal consciousness model, can it ever explain why this kind of qualitative difference arises? Right? Also, does it really make sense to explain blind side? So blind side, what is the sort of the thing that makes this really huge or little neural activity level that matters for consciousness? Blind side that did lose a V1 activity, right? V1 cortex, but other cortical areas are still remaining, and that is active or inactive depending on the task and also situation. So what is the sort of the criterion or physical laws that makes a part of the brain that is really important and part of the brain that is not important for consciousness? Why is it the case that this superior colliculus is important for attention but not for the consciousness? Can activation model explain that? That's a question. And then if you remember, neurons in the fusiform area or B4, B8 area, all these areas have a specific kind of correspondence with particular qualia, right? If you stimulate a fusiform face area, then that generates a conscious face experience. And if you stimulate B4, B8, then it produces some kind of color rainbow kind of things. Why is it? This, is there some kind of a different kind of threshold for different types of the, sort of the experience? That doesn't seem to make sense to me. So what are the alternatives? And the most straightforward alternatives seems to be that to consider a particular pattern of the neural connectivity and also activity patterns that correspond to a particular quale. So this particular neural connectivity may be supported for the face area or color area. And then particular activity pattern also correspond to perceiving the face or perceiving the red-green thing. And that may be consistent with this dual task experiments, where I said that the biological relevance may be like faces or natural scenes and simple things. They are almost already prepared in terms of that connectivity. So a little bit of the activity, which is not even enhanced by attention, is sufficient and generates specific particular quale. On the other hand, red-green disc situation or letters, they are not really prepared in terms of activity patterns or neural connectivity, and therefore you really need a strong attention component to make some kind of transient population activity to see it consciously. So but if that's the case, what kind of patterns are necessary? That's the next question. And most famous kind of hypothesis about this pattern of activation is the synchronous neuronal firing. So when the neurons in the brain, all over the brain, when they are synchronously firing in some way, that generates or that defines one particular pattern, and that defines particular query. And another possibility is the causal interactions. If the neurons in the face area activates another neurons in the face area, or the color area, blah blah blah, then that kind of chain of the reactions may define the query. And then integrated information theory of consciousness that I'm going to introduce from next week is, in a sense, theoretical account to give an answer to this kind of stuff. So wait for it. Also, at this stage, I want to think about the theoretical framework about consciousness itself. So starting from this backward masking, or blind sight experiment, or dual task, all the time I have been kind of introduced the standard task where stimulus is presented on the display, and then subject reports about it with or without metacognition and so on, and then brain imaging tools are used to measure the evoked activity and then compare that with the situation where it doesn't evoke response and so on, right? But this, in retrospect, may be highly similar to this kind of situation, possibly. So this is a cartoon. The policeman is asking, this is where you lost your wallet. And this poor guy who lost a wallet says that, no, I lost it in the park, but this is where the light is. So he knows that, he's kind of asking the wrong question, right? If the purse or wallet was lost in the park, then you need to look up in the park. But because light is here, he's looking for it. It's very similar to the situation where we are using a task evoked kind of paradigm to search for the neural correlates of consciousness, because that is most convenient, most clear in terms of contrasting conscious versus unconscious. But if you think about it, it's a bit strange, in fact. So, aren't we conscious of something all the time? For example, in all of these backward masking or dual task situation, before or after the stimulus presentation, we are aware of the display, we are aware of the room, and so on, and we are thinking about it. So only this activation kind of hypothesis is correct if you are not doing anything, and if the brain is remaining the baseline. What does it mean? Are we not conscious? That can't be the case, right? Before or after the stimulus presentation, we are always conscious. What is conscious? What is inside of a conscious experience is changing. And when the stimulus comes in, that transiently changes a little bit of the brain activation and connectivity, but that doesn't explain the whole things. And also, another thing is that, and we conscious of vision itself, or space or time all the time, right? Even if we close my eyes, right? Still, I'm experiencing something. It's not the same as when I'm completely lost, when I lose consciousness completely in the middle of the night when I don't dream, or when I'm in under the deep general anesthesia. This, closing my eyes, black thing, or even opening my eyes under the complete darkness, that's very different from loss of consciousness. But what does it mean? So here at this point, I invite you to think about consciousness problem from scratch, in a sense, and starting to think about the essential properties of consciousness. And that's the sort of the approach that we take in integrated information theory again from next week. All right, until then, see you.